Welcome to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. In this program, we discuss a range of issues. The platform for this program is the Center for Security, Strategy and Policy Research. CESPA is a policy research center housed in the University of Lahore and researches contemporary security and strategic issues. This program is part of that effort, and we aim to speak with national and international scholars and policy experts on a broad range of issues that have a bearing on Pakistan. So stay with me, and I will be back shortly. Welcome back to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. Today's program is somewhat different. I have with me Dr. Miftah Ismail, former finance minister in the current coalition government, and Dr. Moeed Yusuf, former national security advisor with the previous PTI government. But I'm flagging this more as a CV point because I've invited both as experts in their respective fields rather than as ministers in two different political governments. The debate is about the way forward for Pakistan. I'm not particularly interested in what's wrong because that has been done to death. My interest in inviting Drs. Ismail and Yusuf is to ask them how to get out of where we are and what needs to be done moving forward to right the course, if at all. So thank you, gentlemen, for being on the program. Let me begin with Miftah. So Miftah, as I said, I'm not really interested in knowing what's wrong because, you've been talking at various universities, at think tanks also. And I was just kind of, I got the crux of some of the points that you've been making. And let me just reproduce them. For instance, you've been talking about the poor quality of education in Pakistan. You've been talking about the state wasting money. You've also been talking about elite capture, calling it a 1% republic. You have also spoken about the language divide, i.e. English versus Urdu. You've talked about the importance of women's participation in the workforce. You have also talked about state not doing business, which is your case against the state-owned enterprises. You have also talked about the fact that Pakistan is not really a well-liked country. Globally, you have talked about, and actually we discussed that on a previous program, trained manpower with reference to a bigger chunk of remittances coming to Pakistan. You've also talked about your case against subsidies, your case against big infrastructure. I think you have also referred at some point to the Islamabad airport with reference to that. And then state interests above petty politicking. And you've talked about the case against artificial exchange rate, poor quality of bureaucrats. I think I've got the gist of what you've been saying here. So given all this, tell me, what is the way forward? And what are the priorities?
Okay. Thank you, Ejaz. Thank you for the kind introduction as well. I think I think let's divide this into immediate term, short term, and long term. Immediately, I think the way forward is for us to get back on track with the IMF. And that is our best guarantee to reassure the market that there is not going to be a default event in Pakistan. Pakistan is not the only country that's having financial difficulty because of the international crises in terms of higher inflation, higher interest rates, commodity prices, Ukraine-Russia war, and all of those stuff. This is a perfect storm for Pakistan in terms of the difficulties it is facing. And so the first immediate thing we need to do is to get back on track with the IMF. Do the best deal you can, but nonetheless get back on track. That's the immediate term. Then we have to understand what brought us here, and what brought us here is not what PDM has done or what Imran Khan has done or what has happened in the last few years. What has brought us here is what's happened in the last 50 years or 75 years. That we have to rethink Pakistan and reimagine how we do things. We have some of the finest bureaucrats in Pakistan, and yet nothing happens. There is now a lack of competence as well amongst politicians and bureaucracy. There is, I think, long term, there's been too much ingress of the armed forces in the affairs of politics in Pakistan. That's not really helpful at all. It is too much of an elite republic. So we have to do things differently than what we have been doing, and we have to sue for growth. So things that enable growth we should go for, and things that don't enable growth we should not go for.
Okay, so a quick intervention here, and then you can continue with the rest of it. So everything that has happened, and as you said, it's happened over the last 70, 75 years, has created structures of its own and perverse incentives, and of course, vested interests. So how can we break those structural shackles if some of the people are actually benefiting from this? The 1% republic, as you call it.
Okay, so the thing is that elites don't really want growth. If you already are an elite, if you're already an elite, then you don't really need growth. You just need to maintain status quo. And so that's what's happening in Pakistan. So we don't really do growth. And when I say elite, it's not really just the moneyed elite. It's a lot of other people who have positions of power, whether it's politicians, whether it's the bureaucracy, whether it's the ulama kiram, whether it's the armed forces. But even like for instance, the labor union and PIA. A PIA loses $55 billion a year, which is enough to make several Aga Khan University hospital type, schools or hospitals around the country. We can build one or two Aga Khans every year, in different cities of Pakistan. But we persist with having PIA, which is providing not a better service than other airlines, which is not providing more convenience or a lower fare, and yet which loses 55 billion as opposed to private airlines that make a few billion and give us 40% of their income and taxes. But again, PIA is privatization stopped because of their vested interest. So everything Pakistan government tries to do for growth is always stopped by some vested interest or the other. So now I think a coalition of especially young people have to come around about that has to say that, look, we can't go on. I mean, if 40% of Pakistanis want to leave Pakistan, a majority of our young people want to leave Pakistan, things that we've been doing are not the right things to do. So we have to do things differently. The disaffection with the state is about as high as it has ever been. And so I think that we really need to bring about a coalition. How does it come about? I don't really know. I'll be very honest with you. From my part, I mean, I think, we should please start talking about this, that, a new coalition has to come about, which brings young people's interest into the mix and which, sues for growth and development as opposed to just the status quo.
So when you talk about this new coalition, I'm assuming that it has to be a political coalition. I mean, or in the sense that this coalition needs to then make space for itself in politics, in opposition to the existing political groupings.
Either that, or if a majority of Pakistanis, understand that we need to have growth and we need to have health policies that bring about growth, whether those policies are pursued by PTI or PMLN or People's Party or Jamaat Islami. The objective should be to bring about growth in Pakistan. I think if the majority of Pakistanis understand that, then I think that other existing parties will also come around. They will see where the votes are. And there will be fewer votes for slogan mongering about hum ghas kha lenge, koi ghas nahi khata.
So we are talking about this new coalition being a political entity and then push the agenda, come into being in a way that it can attract votes and the rest of it. Okay, so we're going to park this thought because I think this is going to come up again slightly differently. But let me pull in Moeed Yusuf into this conversation. Moeed, before I get to a direct question to you, is there something you want to say about what Miftah has already said?
Thanks, Ejaz. First of all, it's a pleasure being here. Look, I think, what I've seen going on in this country and where we are, I think there are certain fundamentals. What Miftah has said, there's no disagreement. Frankly, not much disagreement with what he's been saying for the past month, which I followed. But I think we need to make this simple. There's too much conversation, too much about he should do this, she should do this, what could happen, who's good, who's bad. Let me just first put out for you, if you allow me, what the problem is. I mean, Miftah says rightly it's the last 50 years, 75 years, or whatever it may be. But what is that 50 or 75 years? At least let's start speaking the truth to ourselves on where we've gone wrong. So, to my mind, there is a very fundamental problem with our economic model that existed in those 50 and 75 years. And I'm not talking about growth and consumption based or export led or whatever it may be. The simple formula that we had to exist and grow and sustain ourselves as a country was that we will use our relevance in the security world, in the geopolitical world, to attract dividends for our economy. We were allied with the West in the Cold War, the Afghan and the 80s war, then the post 9/11 war. Essentially, our model was we will remain relevant to the world because of our security strength and what goes on around in our region. That will then create a windfall of foreign exchange inflow into the country. And from that, we will sustain ourselves. Now, the problem is, if you look at the data, whenever there was a crisis on our borders, whenever we were needed globally for due to our security relevance, you had money pouring in, right? We generated growth from that money, but the assumption of the economic modeling was that this inflow will continue forever. While geopolitically, our strategy was that we want to end the wars. So post 9/11, we kept asking the US that you need to talk and end this war, the conflict. But the economic modeling somehow presumed after we got into the post 9/11 world that this inflow of capital or foreign exchange will continue forever.
Okay.
Exactly the same in
okay.
exactly the same in the Cold War.
Okay. So let me
wait. Let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Because all these inflows were non-transparent, were driven because of a reality external to our border, you had non-transparent distribution. And so the elite capture was built into this model. Over time, the elite capture has perpetuated. The economics of our modeling is completely haywire because it was always built on a false premise that we'll keep getting money from abroad because of our security relevance. And at the end of the day, you've got a situation where you now have lost geopolitical and geostrategic relevance as well. Because of the great power contestation between the US and China, because of India becoming the darling to the West, we don't have that kind of cachet left. So when that cachet is gone, the economic model was flawed to begin with. We don't want wars on our borders anymore. You've got a collapse of the economy. I mean, as a political scientist, this is my explanation. I completely get what Miftah is saying, and there's so much to be done, and I'll come to that. I'll even be willing to give you what I think should happen in Pakistan. But at least let's start speaking the truth to ourselves that we had a fundamental problem. We were trying to build an economy based on our security relevance rather than the other way around. Okay. And that's the change that we were thinking about in the past couple of years where this geoeconomics and this entire conversation came from.
Okay, so let me try to summarize this and correct me if I've got this right. There's obviously a built-in tension between what we wanted in terms of the ending of the conflict and at the same time conflict-related inflows. So there's a built-in tension in that. Secondly, our model seems to be that the money will keep coming in and we will keep consuming it instead of doing structural reforms to actually put the economy on a solid footing. Have I got that right?
Look, I mean, yes, this concept of we are too big to fail, where does that come from? That is an assumption that we are important enough that this money will keep flowing. And if the money will keep flowing, why should we take pain upon ourselves? We will continue to consume the way we do. We will live beyond our means because ultimately the world will provide for us one way or another. And that was linked to our genuine security relevance in the world. Now, let me also tell you that because of this model, Ejaz, the world has over time tried to destabilize Pakistan. There are many enemies we have, and that has allowed us to then point fingers at the outsiders and say, the problem lies over there. Well, the problem does lie over there, but unless we can acknowledge that internally we've lived beyond our means always, and this inflow of money that was coming in the times of crises was actually a net negative for Pakistan. We were losing lives, we were losing people, there was instability. There's, one war brought us the Kalashnikov culture, the other brought us terrorism. That has been realized. There is a consensus in the system now, at least when I was in government, both civilian and military, that we can't go on this model. That's where the NSP came from. That's where geoeconomics came from. So we are now standing and heading in the direction that we need to. But for that, the painful decisions have to be taken. You can't go to a new model conceptually, but continue with old habits. If you keep doing that, well, the result is what we are today.
Okay. Let me run this by Miftah, who's obviously listening in, and get his take before I get to the NSP side of this discussion. Miftah.
It's hard to disagree with Moeed that what we've done in the last 45, 50 years, the choices we've made has led us to where we are today. And that the idea of Pakistan being a security state has meant that we've lost on economic development. And so once you don't have economic development, you can't even have security. So now we neither have economic prominence nor do we have security preponderance for that matter. But the only thing I would say in defense of General Zia and General Musharraf, if you will, is that did they have choice at the time that they made the choice of becoming parts of the jihads or wars or whatever you want to call it. So one reason that the world wanted us to be a frontline state is our geopolitical or our geographic proximity to Afghanistan and India and all that stuff. But the other thing is that we couldn't really escape. I mean, we can't escape geography. So we are in a very difficult neighborhood. But nonetheless, I agree with Mohit that we have not made the right choices and that some of the money is coming in, especially during Musharraf's time. And Musharraf had a lot of fiscal space where he could have made some fundamental reform. That even and a martial law regime also gives you space. There is no opposition. You can put them in jail at will or exile them or whatnot. But Musharraf certainly wasted a lot of this money coming into Pakistan. But I think fundamentally, I think we are a very weak state. We are a very ineffective state, and we've not been able to really do anything. One of the things that I cry about is the fact that after so many years of trying different things, the Darb-e Azab or Raddul Fasad or Karachi operations and this and that, and everybody paying lip service, politicians, military leaders, everybody paying lip service to the fact that we should have law and order, we still don't. I mean, there's always a problem. And the world really, one of the reasons, and I'm convinced one of the reasons our exports are down or are low compared to Bangladesh, India, and all of the other countries is because no foreigner is willing to come to Pakistan.
Okay. I would have loved to answer this question, but since I am moderating, I can't do that. So I'm going to take this to Mohit. Mohit.
Look, I'm not saying that we had a choice or we shouldn't have done that. That's not the issue. The fact that we were where we were in terms of the security relevance was ultimately a good thing. We could have benefited from that, and we did to a large extent. That's not the point. My problem is with this assumption that we made that somehow this inflow will always continue and we don't need to take pain internally to do things that would then sustain us on our own. That, I think, the fundamental problem. Look, reform and structural reform, these are big words, but these are just essentially mindsets. What we have done to ourselves is that we've gotten into this mindset that on the first of every month, we will show up somewhere and everybody will realize we are so important that we need the next check. But we've done nothing to ensure that we don't need to be showing up to various stores in the world on the first of every month saying, can I have a little bit of cash because I need money? My problem is not with the geostrategic sort of space we were in. My problem is that money that came into Pakistan should have been used to do things that were painful at the time, less painful then, will be more painful now with the economy, that we did not have to show up to the world to ask for more money. Look, Ejaz, as a Pakistani, and somebody who feels very guilty, in terms of having served as an official, and yet perhaps not being able to see the kind of country that I want to see. Let me say two or three things. And this comes really from the heart, so I apologize to anybody who feels offended by this, but I must. Look, for me, it hurts me when our national conversation is about whether we will default or not default. We are declaring victory because we won't default. We are saying if we default, then that's a loss. It hurts me when we say X person good, X person bad. We never talk about issues. We can't seem as a nation to get past the next 2 months or the 4 months and talk about the real issues. Tell me, why should I not dream of my country being a regional power and a superpower? Why should I always be told Pakistan is about to go, or will it be here? Pakistan will survive or Pakistan won't survive? Why should I feel proud of being an elite of this country if this is where my country is, and this is where, frankly, I and others, all of us, are responsible for bringing it there? We are celebrating that we are going around the world, and I'm not pointing a finger at any one government. I'm talking about our mindset, our psyche. We are going around the world, and we can proudly say we went to beg and we got a lot of money. This hurts. I don't understand what has happened to us. I feel, honestly, and I'm sorry, I feel that we treat our country as a rented property. There are 4 or 5 individuals who get together in a college and rent a house and take one room at a time. They don't care whether walls are painted. They don't care whether the bedding is made. They don't care whether the electricity bills are being paid on time or not. And on top of that, when you're leaving that building, you refuse to pay the last rent. That's how we treat our country. We break it. We don't care about any civic sense. And the country can go to hell as long as I can drive my big car. That how we want to run this country? Because now where we've come, Ejaz, we are going down.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying going down, Pakistan will go Khuda na khasta disappear, but my benchmark for my country is to be a regional power.
Right.
I am the one who used to say when I was in government every day, what is there to hide? Why can't we stand up to everybody and tell our story? Why can't we look them in the eye and say what is true? And I did it when I was in government. Nobody could challenge us, except on one thing. I am internally so weak today that I can't do what I need to do to stand up to the world and say, this is where I'm going.
Okay.
Join me because I'm a powerhouse.
Okay.
That has to come internally. Stop blaming outsiders. We need to introspect. We need to take pain now. Otherwise,
Right. So
it'll be too late.
I want to get to that. But let me just run this by Miftah before I take a short break, and then we continue our discussion. Miftah, anything you want to add to what Moeed has said?
Look, everything that Moeed has said is absolutely, I think, on the dot. And his idea, I think, that the last idea that, I only care about driving a big car and not caring about what happens, to the rest of the country. I think that's actually true for our elite. I mean, it's become a rentier elite, as you have actually written and talked about over the years, but just one point really that, I think that Pakistan is probably today at its lowest ebb in a long time, since perhaps, at least in my adult life, and I think that hopefully, I'm hoping that, even today as we speak, and the Prime Minister's got $1 billion commitment from UAE that gives us a few more weeks, and a commitment to re-roll another 2 billion of their deposits. The point being that we are going from country to country and week to week and month to month, and hopefully at some point, the Pakistani elite will also realize that really this is not how to run a country, and that we have a serious deficiency in our governance model and many other deficiencies besides, and we really now need to rethink how we conduct policy in Pakistan.
Right.
And governance in Pakistan.
Right. So this is almost akin to what T.S. Eliot said in 4 Quartets, and that to be restored, our sickness must grow worse. I'm going to take a short break, but after the break, we'll be discussing the way forward. That is something that has eluded us up until now. Stay with me. Welcome back to InFocus with Ejaz Haider. I'm in conversation with Doctors Miftah Ismail and Moeed Yusuf. Moeed, let's get to certain specifics. And let me pick up the point that Miftah spoke about with reference to a new coalition. Is it possible that we can get this kind of new coalition if we actually focus on local governments and consider them as the nurseries from which the leadership will ultimately rise to the provincial and national levels?
Ejaz, my experience of being in, but more so studying the public sector across developing countries, is that you've got to prioritize. The capacities are not sufficient to do multiple things at the same time, or at least multiple important things at the same time. Who would disagree that we need this coalition? And if you ask me, in terms of the way forward, I would say that the first thing we have to do is to agree on the elections, and more importantly, to agree that whatever the election results are in a free and fair election will be accepted, and what these main political actors will not bring into day-to-day petty politics after that. I think one of the biggest problems we have in the immediate term, of course, is this debate about election. But my worry is, once the elections happen, whenever they happen, are we going to get stability? Because if we are not, then much of the economic agenda is going to take a back seat again. And there, I think the only way to do this is to agree, one, of course, that elections will be fair, and then they will be accepted. But then, what are some of the key issues on which we will not play sort of the parochial game, and agree as a polity that certain things are going to be done with policy continuity without interruption? If we are not going to have that kind of understanding, I'm afraid then it's one step forward and two step backwards. In terms of the larger governance piece, if you ask me, I would point you to three things. One is local government as the mainstay of your governance. So I completely agree with that. And yes, I mean, coalition and how you bring that together. But essentially, it's just about the political will by all the main political actors to ensure that local governments are empowered, including with fiscal responsibility. That's very important. If you're not going to transfer the financial authority and power to them, then I think it's pretty useless. Second, I think we must use our interprovincial coordination mechanisms to the hilt. The Council of Common Interest, that's the real platform that has to be empowered to make sure that this constant discrepancy, disconnect, and perhaps debate and a very divisive discourse between the center and provinces when the governments are different disappear, because you act as five countries rather than one country if that happens. So essentially, to me, frankly, it's local governance, it's this idea of interprovincial coordination getting better, and the third one is some kind of constitutional cover for policy continuity of the key policies that we require, whether that's in the energy space, whether it's fiscal deficit already has gone through parliament, etc. So constitutional cover. Otherwise, frankly, whichever time we've seen in Pakistan's history, anybody comes into power, spends half the time reversing what has happened, and then tries to figure out what to do. By the time they're done, then the next turn comes and same thing happens. So I think these three things we have to agree on as a polity if we have to have any hope of real economic reform, economic security, etc.
Right. Miftah, prioritize. You can't do everything. Firstly, it should be accepted politically that there should be elections free and fair, and then whosoever has been defeated must concede, and from that point onwards there should be no more bickering with reference to election being stolen or being unfair, etc., etc. And then prioritize local government, interprovincial coordination, and policy continuity. Anything else you want to add to this, and whether you agree with this?
So finally, I find something to disagree with Moeen, actually.
Okay.
I totally agree with the local government part. I think that's absolutely true. I agree with largely with the intergovernmental, interprovincial relations and also with the federation and local relations. But I think this continuity of policy, constitutional cover, I have an issue with, because just on his third point, which is to give a constitutional cover to the economic policies of the previous government. I think that we should not tie the hands of an incoming democratic government that way. That said, I will also say that in Pakistan, mostly seriously, economic policies do have a continuity that is not appreciated by us. When PTI came in 2018, and as antagonistic PTI and PMLN were, what policies did it change? When we came, what policies did PDM change? Any concessions that we've given to the government really are not pulled back. Every agreement that we had signed, PTI honored. Every agreement that PTI has signed, we've honored. So I think that point, the third point, I'm reluctant about. But the first point that Mohit made about empowering local government, I mean, I think that really is now the most important thing. And think of a federal government as just a monopoly and provincial governments as oligopolies, unless and until you have many jurisdictions, at least in government empowered at divisional level and district levels, which will compete with each other, you will not have a better governance model in Pakistan.
Right,
and my issue is
but empowerment, but also fiscal responsibility and the ability to generate revenue to actually make them effective.
Yes, yeah, if I may just add this.
Yeah.
Look, the NFC award that awards 57.5% money to the provinces from the federation without money for GB and AJK and Islamabad. If you add those together, that's 62%. That's way too generous to the provinces and fiscally irresponsible and also wasteful. So provinces have not really raised their own revenues. Provinces have increased their payroll in the last 10 years by more than 500%. And they've really wasted a lot of money. So I think the provinces should be required to raise their own money. Every federalism paper or every federalism essay would tell you that it's not just that you give them money, you also make them responsible for raising their own revenue. So we need provinces, divisions, and districts to raise their own revenue, perhaps through property taxes or whatever taxes. We need to strengthen the federation's finances. But at the same time, we need to give constitutional powers to districts and divisions and not make provinces this hegemon which they've become.
Right. Mohit, you want to quickly respond to Miftah on where he disagrees with you, but then I also want you to add certain other points.
I get what Miftah is saying, but frankly, I'll just take one sector, and I think that would make the point. Look at energy. One of the main reasons of where we are in terms of lack of investor confidence, in terms of the very high rates ultimately that we've had to pay, this whole IPP fiasco is what? Starting in the 90s when the IPP policy came, just look at every government. I mean, the People's Party government brought this in. The PMLN government at that time came in and opened up corruption cases and went after virtually everybody. In fact, sovereign guarantees were called into question. Musharraf came, something else happens. I mean, that's just one sector I can tell you where every 2 years some new Einstein shows up to do something and we end up deeper in the ditch. My basic point is not that I agree with this, that you can't, tie the democratic incoming government's hands behind their back. But on certain things, for instance, fiscal deficit, right? I mean, we have something, the parliament did pass something. There are certain things that we must agree on that we will not be touching. And sadly, I have to say the ones where there's most continuity is when our hands are tied behind our back by outsiders. This is another very sad tale of Pakistan. When we are under external pressure to do something, we start following, whatever those instructions are, which are necessary a lot of times. Why can't we do the right thing ourselves and have enough discipline that we don't get to that point, right? Okay. That's the only point I'll make.
Okay. Just hold that thought. Just hold that thought. Miftah, a quick response, and then I want Mohit to take us further to the points that he may have with reference to the way forward.
No, I mean, if you're asking my response, he's correct. But let me give you another example from the energy sector that PTI's government had renegotiated, for instance, deals with the IPP. But they'd only paid them half of the money that they were supposed to pay and didn't pay the other half, and the other half was paid by me and the PDM government. So I mean, and Mohit's point, that yes, when we are bound by outsiders or we are bound by sovereign commitments, we do fulfill those commitments.
Okay, so let's get to further points, if there are any, with reference to the way forward. Mohit.
Yes, look, the first thing I want to say is that my wish and hope right now is that any conversation that people like you, people like Miftah, me, and others we do in this country is only on one question: what do we practically need to do to move ahead?
Okay.
Right? And so, in that stead, frankly, let me just say one, we have to begin with a mindset change. We have to feel bad when we go and find enough money to last another month. We have to move away from this mindset, which is a necessity, unfortunately, right now. Everything is about cash flow. Everything is about, you want to tax somebody, why? I need money tomorrow. I want to go and take a trip somewhere, why? I need to find money tomorrow. You have to get past that, and for that I talked about the politics of it in terms of the agreement around the elections. We've talked about governance. On the economy, Miftah is better placed than me, but frankly, I would just prioritize three things. Number one is privatization, and you can put them in any order. Privatization of SOEs that are loss making, and we know we are not going to be able to turn around, only being prevented because of vested interest. Second is the energy sector. Way too complicated for me to get into now. Again, Miftah is better placed, but we have to find a way past this secular debt and the losses that we're incurring because of that. And the third, please, for God's sakes, let's move away from this conversation about import substitution being the answer. It'll fix up. Nowhere in the world has it done it. We have to go for export-led growth, of course, over time. And there too, let's just pick one or two sectors. Let's pick, for me, IT, agriculture, maybe one or two others, and the specialists can talk about it. We don't have the capacity in the system to focus on too much, as I said. So export, privatization, and energy for me. We have created certain myths. For instance, every dollar of FDI that comes into the country is celebrated. Some of it is just a net loss for us. I would not even count that. I don't want that money. I want FDI not in speculative sectors. I want them in export-oriented sectors, right? Can we manage that or not? That's going to be tied to where you go with exports. If you want to do this, you have to reorient your diplomacy towards economic diplomacy. This was a clear consensus in the system when we were doing the national security policy. The initial intervention I made about our previous model, we have moved away from there. Full support from the civilian side, full support from the military side. Economic security has been owned as the concept now, but we have to do these things to then get it to reality and get the benefits we need. Our Foreign Office, to my mind, has to completely reorient itself and focus on economic diplomacy. Okay. Regionally, we have to answer one question, and answer that question honestly. Whichever way we go, I'm okay with, but we need one answer, and then we need to work on that. What do we want to do with our India relationship? Do we want to move forward? We can't move forward. We want status quo. We want to take it in a different direction. Because let me tell you, Ejaz, this is with full confidence of somebody who was in the system. India is not letting even the smallest opportunity to isolate and hurt Pakistan go. Now, that could mean one or two things. You want to, react in kind, or you want to find another way out of that. This is not the time for that debate, but we can't just sit on the India question and pretend that it doesn't exist. Two more things. How will you manage all of this? The administrative part of this. There, I think Miftah's point on bureaucracy, I've seen many very good, bright, excellent individuals in our civil service. As a system, it cannot deliver because it lacks domain knowledge. We've got very good specialists who know how to implement things, who know the rules of business, etc. We need domain knowledge. And that is why I'm a fan of this National Executive Service model that was proposed during Musharraf's time and before that as well. Basically, you need to merge, call it whatever you want. You need to merge specialists who have the authority to make decisions with the civil service that is very good at implementing. Just the civil service, even though they're brilliant in their own right, the world has moved to a specialized entity which our bureaucracy simply can't keep up with. And so you've got to have lateral induction of experts. And finally, sorry, just one other point, and this is my pet. who is going to work on the state of our society? We keep talking about the state and the politicians and the technocrats and the military and whatever. Just we've devolved or we've regressed into a society that doesn't follow even the basic principles of citizenry. Are we teaching our kids not to litter? Are we telling our kids that corruption is bad? Is the curriculum now teaching civics? Is there any public diplomacy campaign around civics in this country? My kids have not seen a single peaceful day because they were born around 9/11, right? So they are desensitized to violence. We treat our women like they're objects rather than human beings. We have to get civics as in everybody's mind. The only conversation should be how to be a citizen, how to keep Pakistan clean, how not to take this as rented property. The example I gave earlier. And let me just end by saying, I'm sorry to say, even the most responsible today in Pakistan have not got that basic citizenry in them. I include myself in that. If we are not going to change it, you will never have public pressure to do the right thing on those who are making decisions, and you will continue with the elite capture and continue living off borrowed money. I'm sorry, but without focusing on the society and changing that, we are not going to get to where we need to go.
Right. Great points, Moeed. Miftah, you heard what Moeed said. I want to get your take on the points that he has raised before I close the program. Miftah.
I think I agree with largely agree with what Mohit said. In terms of I've talked about 7 pillars myself. For growth, which includes exports, which Mohit has talked about, which includes privatization that Mohit has talked about, education. One of the things that I think that Mohit has not said, but I think that when he talks about other things it's sort of implied, which is population growth. That unless and until we control the growth of our population, no amount of planning would allow us to educate our children. I think he makes a very important point, which is that we need to figure out what we need to do with India and our neighbors generally, Afghanistan, Iran, India, and we have to sort of really rethink exactly what our objectives are for our nation. Do we want to have growth per year? Do we want to have $10,000 per capita GDP in 15, 20 years? Do you want to, have a national security state? What is it that you really want? And once you do that and agree with some of the things that, that Mohit and I have talked about, I think that other things really would follow. You cannot really talk about, some sort of a national pride and keep PIA when you're losing 55 billion rupees. You have to sort of think about what is it the last 75 years of hostility have gotten you in terms of Kashmir, and if some different sort of policy is required, without wanting to wash your hands off it. This is a very challenging Indian government right now because of its Hindutva, leanings and all that. But nonetheless, we have to figure out what is it that we want in life out of India, out of Afghanistan, out of Iran, or our neighbors. But I largely agree with what Mohit said.
Mohit also made this point about citizenry, the concept of citizenship, and the fact that there was a time, and I'm sure our generation used to read civics, जिसे उर्दू में शहरियत भी कहा जाता था. But we don't teach civics now. We don't know. We don't want to make a queue. We litter wherever we want to litter. And so on and so forth. So essentially, I think Moiz's point is that if you do not have a sense of citizenship and your responsibilities as a citizen, then you will also not be law-abiding. You will break the law or violate the norms wherever you get the opportunity to do so. So I just want to get your quick take on that.
Give everybody a stake in Pakistan. Give everybody a piece of Pakistan. Let them feel pride in Pakistan. Let them also feel that Pakistan is taking care of you. If I feel that the country is like a parent to me, takes care of me, the state cares about me, my neighbors care about me, then I think I'll also develop a caring for my neighbor. But if I feel that I'm just being pushed around, if 60% of Pakistanis are making less than 40,000 rupees a month, if 700 in Pakistan are stunted, wasted, or malnourished, then expecting good civic behavior from them, I think, is a big ask.
Okay, that's also an interesting and important point. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and the purpose was and remains to actually talk about how to move forward. Both of you
My pleasure.
have put across points, and I believe that every one of those points requires a separate discussion. I will actually propose, at CESPA, which is where this program is housed, to see if we can get a few more people and actually do some more work with reference to policy work, with reference to the points that have been raised, and I think also to put that out. In any case, for today's program, I'm really grateful to both of you, Dr. Miftah Ismail, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, for being with me. This is all for this episode of InFocus with Ejaz Haider. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. Do like and subscribe to the CESPA channel. It helps us to bring quality discussions to you. Take care and goodbye.